Good evening. As mentioned, my name is Keyontah Humphries. I see a lot of familiar faces in the room, so I won't belabor that point. But what I will offer, if you know me, you know I'm a realist, and so I will offer and advise that there are some very sensitive pictures that I will show throughout the presentation, and I want to offer a trigger warning to anyone. And if at any point folks want me to definitely speed through, you can put your hand in the air and I'll know that's what you're telling me to do, but I do want to offer that. And so tonight I've been asked to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think what's most important for people to know, because it's been getting a really bad rap, is that this is a social justice, civil rights movement. This is not about one particular incident. This is not about this particular moment in time, but this is truly this generation's continuation of a movement that started long ago. And so what does that mean, right? Social justice. It's about human rights. It's about equality. And when we talk about Black Lives Matter, or the movement for Black Lives, we've got to go way back, even before slaves entered this country, to 1650 when the transatlantic slave trade started, until today. So we're talking almost 400 years. And so, brief history lesson. This is how many of us, our ancestors, got to this country. Stowed away in the bottom of cargo ships. And for the sake of time, I won't go through the quotes, but I think it's important to know that unlike immigration of today, this is how our ancestors got to this country. And it came with a history of indoctrination and laws that separated families, and that is inherent. In our last conversation last month, you heard social workers talk about how we inherit trauma through our DNA. Having never lived through it, we carry it with us. And so you can see here that discrimination was something that was meted out without any censorship. And in fact, it was even the most Christian of folks thought it appropriate to tear apart families. And also to inflict bodily harm upon people. But fast forward to Reconstruction, there was a time where this country and the people and the powers that be decided, wait, we've been doing things wrong. Let's try to get it right. And I think someone in the last session also asked then, what happened? You know, if we've had this opportunity to get things right, what happened? And here you can see Frederick Douglass, who was a political thinker, and he impacted the Reconstruction and the ideas that came out of that, along with the only two African-American senators who were elected at the time. The next picture gives you an idea of the state reps that were elected at the time. So well before Barack Obama, we had black people in politics. But what happened? Our first speaker told us that folks needed to separate us, right? And so from the late 1870s, Southern state legislatures, not Northern, but Southerners, said those freedmen laws weren't good enough anymore. We needed to separate people, and we needed to disrupt the progress that was happening in black communities. And so let's be clear, it was intentional. It wasn't happenstance. Black Wall Street, the Tulsa Race Riots is one example of that. And I want you to pay close attention to the picture in the corner. You're going to see black folks with their hands in the air a lot in the pictures I show you. And why is that important is because for generations, African Americans have come to the movement, have come to society saying, we're not violent, we're not aggressive, we are here, we are human, treat us as such. And right here in Florida, we have a legacy. Not just of other places like Tulsa or Alabama or Georgia, but right here in Florida, we have a legacy of committing atrocities against African Americans. And I encourage you all to, if not watch the film, definitely look up what happened in Rosewood. So, Jim Crow, Black Lives Matter. We know, we learned that Jim Crow is probably the foundation of this movement, right? But I think what's important for people to understand is that Jim Crow was orchestrated. It was an orchestrated dance, we like to say, between black movement leaders and white power structures. And why do I say that? Because they decided we were only going to put up respectable black Negroes. And there's a reason why in our history books you see the people you see and you know the stories you hear. And so I'm hoping folks know who these folks are. Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, and Rosa Parks, right? Okay, I was just waiting to hear people. Got it, right? And so in the Black Lives Matter movement, in the traditional civil rights movement, it was about the respectable Negro and making sure that you had on your Sunday's best anytime you walked into the streets and participated in civil disobedience. It was making sure that the person who was going to be the image, the spokesperson for the movement was educated, elite, Christian, cisgender. But who they didn't want you to talk about were people like Malcolm X, Bayard Rustin, a gay black man, who many don't know was actually the mentor to Martin Luther King. Not his aide, but his mentor. He was the person who organized the March on Washington. Martin Luther King was simply the guest speaker. And Claudette Colville, the first young lady in Montgomery to decide, not because it was orchestrated in a meeting the night before, but simply one day, I'm not going to continue to give up my seat on a bus. And I do want to share the quote that she gave. She says, as a teenager, I kept thinking, why don't the adults around here just say something? Say it ain't so. They know it's not acceptable. I knew then and I knew now. When it comes to justice, there's no easy way to get it. You can't sugarcoat it. You have to take a stand and say, this is not right, and that's what I did. But the powers that be decided that she should not be the face of the Montgomery bus boycott because she was 15, and shortly after her release from jail, she became a teenage mother. And so we fast forward through slavery, and we talked about Jim Crow. The next time this country decided, well, we made some progress, and now it's not necessarily about the law, but about black pride, and that came with the Black Liberation and Nationalism movement. And I shared this because I want folks to know that the Black Lives Matter movement is intergenerational. We pull from the wisdom, the failures and success from the movements prior in order to do the work that we do today. And so it really was about black pride, right? And we saw it in different facets of our community, from our urban ghettos to even on the center stage of American social movements. But it was also yet another time where we saw white sympathizers come to the movement and say that we can support you, we understand, we empathize. And celebrities, during the Black Liberation movement and the Black Panther movement, you had actresses like Jane Fonda and others who donated a lot of money to make sure that those movements move forward. But our government wasn't happy with that. So again, let's be clear, it wasn't happenstance. A lot of the things that have happened were in fact intentional. And so we've got leaders who, like Fred Hampton, actually was talking about unity and unifying the movement. He said, you can't jail a revolution, but you can jail a revolutionary, but you cannot jail the revolution. And as many of you know who studied history, that a lot of the activists in that movement at some point were incarcerated. But his voice was one of unity, and he called for both Hispanic and white activists to come join this movement. And many of them heard his cry. However, he was eventually assassinated by the Chicago Police Department. And so with the assassination of MLK, the assassination of Fred Hampton, the assassination of Malcolm X, and so many others, leaders at that time, I think, were truly awakened to this idea of we've got to get involved in the politics of this system. To just rail against the system isn't enough. We've got to be involved in the politics. I'm sorry. And so Bobby Seale, ran for mayor of Oakland, California. And it was the first time since Reconstruction that about 50,000 black people were registered to vote in one election cycle. But just as quickly as we were making progress, Black Liberation Movement in Philadelphia, under the auspice of MOVE, the city government, city council, chief of police decided to bomb their headquarters, thus taking out about 3 blocks of Philadelphia. And no one was ever prosecuted for the bombing. This was the government's doing. Now, I'm a fan, of course. I didn't grow up in this age. It predates me a bit. But in 1971, Marvin Gaye sang a song, "What's Going On," right?
Yes.
Right? Called many of people from around the world into question, and he calls us to question, what are we doing? And it wasn't about black or white, but it was brother, sister. And this is where I will caution that there will be some triggers. And so, while we've got musicians and activists and actors and people and celebrities all lending their voice to a movement, we've also got death happening day after day. And these images, though many will say are old, are the same images we're starting to see in our country today. Pictures of mothers with their children crying because fathers have been killed. And so what young people today say is the whole damn system is guilty. And in my interview with NPR, I mentioned that this movement was unapologetic. And I cannot stress that enough. We've been trying for a very long time to put forth that respectable Negro, to put forth that positive, sugar-coated image of society. But enough is enough. And that is what young people are saying. And by no means do we condone the violence that has come forth. And members from the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as movement organizers like Haley and I, don't condone the violence, nor do we perpetuate or encourage people to participate. But people are fed up. And when you got young people who are killed senselessly by people who claim to either be neighborhood watch or to serve and protect our country, we have a problem. And so, where did this movement grow out of? I gave a history lesson. But it truly, the Black Lives Matter movement, its current state, the hashtag per se, came out of Trayvon Martin's killing right here in the state of Florida. When 3 women decided who were living in California, that they needed to speak, and they used social media as their platform. But then when Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, it wasn't about social media anymore. It was about organizing the community to respond. And so they took a hashtag and then sent out a call for people to come to Ferguson to help organize that community. 1, to provide grief counseling. 2, to provide educational services, because that town was torn apart after. Similar to the Black Panther movement, and that's why I laid out the history lesson, because we're pulling from the positive and the negative, the lessons learned from those previous movements. But we cannot escape or ignore the human impact that this has. We can talk about statistics all day long, but there is a human impact to this. And so Eric Gardner, also a father in New York, was killed by law enforcement. And no one was prosecuted for his killing. Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge recently. And too many people watched his death on Facebook. But I can't ignore the human impact. And so now we've got a family torn apart, very similar to Medgar Evers' family, very similar to Malcolm X's family, to Martin Luther King's family, where you've got children who now have to live without a father. And they're forced to go to funerals instead of birthday parties. Or as many of the Black women in this country who followed and circulated the hashtag Say Her Name. We remember people like Sandra Bland. And I'll pause here to say that in addition to social media, the other technology that has helped propel this movement has been body cameras. And so here we see her interaction with law enforcement. Yet the officer in her case, no charges were brought because her stop was in fact illegal. No, he didn't kill her on the street, but there was no reason for him to ask her to get out of, or demand that she get out of her car, or even take her and arrest her. But this movement is about more than just policing. This movement is about more than just the first tier of the criminal justice system. And it's about more than just black and brown men who are caught up in the system. It also impacts the LGBT community. And Black Lives Matter is one of the few movements out there that has called our brothers and sisters across gender and gender identity to be a part of our movement and to represent them and speak for them. CeCe McDonald is one of those individuals who was an activist in her community. And after being a victim of a hate crime, was actually incarcerated for defending herself. And this movement also delves into immigration. Whether we're talking about the epidemic of our black and brown men, mostly men, but also women, who are incarcerated in prison, we also talk about the violence that happens at our borders when people try to enter into this country. Now say what you will about whether they get to stay, but we're still talking about human beings. And the fact that people are killed daily at our borders trying to get into this country is in fact an atrocity. So for the sake of time, I'll move through this. I won't share the videos, but if anybody wants my presentation, I'll definitely email it to you. As I close, I'll simply say, I've got just a few more slides. I'll say this. While we've talked about fighting on behalf of